The chandeliers at Lou Bernardine glowed like softened stars above us, their light reflecting in the polished glass of the private dining room. From our table, the Manhattan skyline stretched wide and glittering, a view so rare it felt almost borrowed. My father sat at the head, cheeks flushed with happiness, his hands folded over the linen as though he wanted to hold the evening in place. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice thick. 60 years, and I never thought I'd be eating lobster in a room like this." He reached across to squeeze my hand, and for a moment I felt the weight of every double shift he had worked to raise us, every sacrifice he made so that his children could stand a little taller than he did. I smiled, telling him it was exactly where he deserved to be. That was true, but I kept to myself the fact that arranging this night had cost $3,000. I thought of it not as a price, but as a gift. The others at the table did not see it that way. My mother gave me a polite smile, but I caught her eyes flick toward the wine list before she looked away. Miles, fresh from business school, leaned back in his chair as if calculating the bill already. And then there was Vivian, my older sister, whose glass of Bordeaux clinked harder than it needed to against the crystal stem. She arched an eyebrow in my direction, her lips curving in that knowing way I had grown up with. It was only the first course, yet I could already sense the evening sliding toward something heavier than champagne. Vivian never could resist a stage, and tonight the dining table was her theater. She leaned forward, her elbows brushing against the edge of her plate, and with a tilt of her chin, she began, "You know," she said, her tone casual but sharp enough to draw blood. "It's interesting how some of us live within our means, and some of us, well, pretend." Her eyes lingered on me just long enough for everyone to know where the arrow was aimed. Ethan, her husband, set down his glass with a chuckle. "She's not wrong," he said, his banker's cadence deliberate. "Viv makes a solid 6 figures, and I do well myself. We know what it takes to afford nights like this." Miles, trying too hard to sound seasoned for his 24 years, added, "I've been tracking every expense since graduation. There's no way a freelance consultant pays for Bernardine without maxing out credit cards." I kept my face neutral, though my chest tightened. To them, my Long Island City apartment was proof of limitation, not choice. My hours, my quiet wardrobe, my small car all painted a picture of struggle they mistook for reality. "I don't think now's the moment," my mother whispered, her pearls trembling against the navy of her dress. She reached toward Vivian as if to pull the words back before they could land, but my sister shook her head. "No. Mom, someone has to say it. This," she gestured to the room, to the skyline glowing behind glass, to the lobster waiting on fine china. "This isn't who Alara really is. It's a performance. And it's embarrassing to watch." My father shifted uncomfortably, the light in his eyes dimming, and I felt the air grow dense around us. Vivian's voice carried, confident, certain, and cruel in its familiarity. Vivian's words hung over the table like smoke that refused to clear. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug certainty I knew too well. "Since you're so sure you can afford this," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw a glance from the waiter nearby, "why don't you show us prove it? Let's see your bank balance." "Vivian," my mother hissed, but Ethan was already nodding. "She has a point," he said smoothly, his cufflinks catching the light. "Elara, dinners here don't come cheap. Even the wine list could wipe out a week's paycheck. I'd wager my bonus that your so-called consulting gig isn't covering this." I felt Miles watching me, his expression serious in a way that seemed borrowed from a lecture hall. "They're right," he added. "You have to be practical about money. This doesn't add up." I steadied my breath, letting their words pass over me. For years, they had underestimated me, reduced my choices to weakness, my silence to naivety. Tonight, they wanted a spectacle, and I decided to give them one. I reached into my purse and drew out a card heavier than it looked, its matte black surface catching no light. The Centurion, titanium, Invitation only. I placed it on the table with a quiet tap that seemed louder than Vivian's clink of glass earlier. The room stilled. Even my father, who had stayed silent through most of the exchange, stared at the card as though it might explain me. Vivian was the first to move. She laughed, sharp and humorless. Oh, please, that's a fake prop if I've ever seen one. Do you honestly expect us to believe you qualify for a black card you'd have to spend $250,000 a year just to keep it? It's not fake, I said, my voice even, though my heart pounded harder than I wanted them to notice. The waiter returned then, and I slid the card toward him. For the full bill, please. The waiter's shoes made no sound against the carpet as he returned, but the look on his face gave him away. He bent slightly, voice pitched low enough for only our table to hear. I'm sorry, Ms. Winslow, he said. There seems to be an issue with your card. A hush fell, broken almost immediately by Vivian's triumphant laugh. I knew it, she said, clapping her hands together like she'd just won a bet. The prop didn't even swipe. That's beyond embarrassing. Ethan leaned back, grinning wide. Next thing you know, debt collectors will be crashing dessert. At least the souffle will still be warm. Miles didn't laugh. He only shook his head slowly, his disappointment sharper than any joke. Ilara, I warned you about this kind of thing. You can't play pretend forever. My father's face was the worst. The joy he'd carried all evening drained from him, leaving his eyes clouded, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find words that wouldn't shatter. I stayed silent, pressing my palms into my lap beneath the tablecloth. My stomach had tightened into knots the moment the waiter approached, not from fear that the card was fake, but from the suspicion I'd carried ever since Vivian pushed me into proving myself. This wasn't a failure of funds. It was something else, something I had dreaded might happen if timing betrayed me. Vivian leaned closer, savoring the spectacle. Do you know what the penalty is for credit card fraud? Because I'm pretty sure it's more than embarrassment. Enough, my mother said sharply. But the reprimand fell flat under the weight of the laughter circling me. The waiter lingered, uncertain, holding the card between his fingers as if it might burn him. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Give me a minute, I said softly. Vivian smirked, her voice dripping with mock pity. A minute won't change the truth. Little sister. I lifted my chin, steadying my breath. I knew exactly what truth was coming, and it wasn't hers. The waiter had barely stepped back when another figure appeared in the doorway. Thomas Chin, the general manager, moved with brisk urgency, his polished shoes breaking the hush in the room. I knew him immediately. We had spoken too many times for him not to recognize me now. Ms. Winslow, he said, his voice carrying more authority than apology. Forgive the interruption. He inclined his head toward my family, then focused back on me. I just heard about the payment issue. The laughter at the table stopped. Vivian froze mid-smirk, her glass halfway to her lips. Ethan leaned forward, brow furrowed. There's no issue with the card, Thomas continued, lowering his voice but ensuring it carried across the table. The problem is on our side. We cannot process this charge because Bernardine still owes your company over $500,000 from last month's contracts. The words hit the table harder than any insult. Forks stilled, glasses paused mid-air. Even the soft jazz from the main dining room seemed to fade. Thomas went on, consulting a small tablet in his hand. The Morrison Gala, the Goldman Sachs reception, the United Nations cultural dinner your firm handled them all. Our accounting department flagged your Centurion card. We cannot charge a client we are still indebted to. My father's hand tightened around the stem of his glass, his eyes wide as though he'd misheard. $500,000, he whispered, across from me. Vivian's smirk dissolved into a stiff line, her cheeks flushed crimson. But no words came. Ethan blinked at me as though I'd turned into someone else entirely. I let the silence expand, my pulse steady at last. That explains it, I said calmly. Please, Thomas, apply tonight's charges against the balance. Of course, Ms. Winslow, he said, bowing slightly. And again, my apologies for the confusion. As he left, the room remained hushed, the weight of his words still pressing against every wall. I turned back to my family, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something more complicated. The door clicked softly behind Thomas, and for the first time all evening, no one rushed to fill the quiet. My family sat frozen, eyes locked on me, as if they were seeing someone entirely new. My mother was the first to break the stillness. All this time, she whispered, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. Her voice carried awe, confusion, and the faintest trace of hurt. I folded my hands in my lap, resisting the temptation to smirk or lecture. Yes, all this time, Vivian still held her wine glass, but her knuckles had turned white against the stem. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally managed. You own something. You're saying Bernardine owes you. For what Winslow and Co.? Events, I said evenly. It's my company. One of the East Coast's largest event planning firms. Corporate galas, private receptions, fundraisers, you name it. Bernardine has catered several of them for me. Ethan's head snapped toward me. Events. That's what you've been doing. His tone tried for casual disbelief, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. I've been building the business for 4 years, I said. It's grown faster than I ever imagined. But yes, that's where my energy goes. Miles frowned, trying to fit this version of me into the one he thought he knew. You never said. You just called it consulting. Why hide it because I wanted to succeed on my own terms? I answered softly, without fanfare, without anyone accusing me of exaggerating. I didn't need validation. Grant's voice was low, almost reverent. You mean to tell me those events I saw on the news, the UN dinner, the museum gala, those were yours? They were? I said. And others you didn't notice. I've been working quietly. That's all. Vivian's glass touched the table with a dull thud. She stared at me, pale and speechless. The certainty she wore like armor stripped bare. I let the silence linger, not out of cruelty, but because truth needed its space. I had carried it alone long enough. The air at the table still felt heavy, as if every breath came with a question. I chose my words carefully, not to boast, but to make the truth undeniable. Last year, Winslow & Co. generated $47 million in revenue. I said quietly, this year, we're on track for 68. The numbers seemed to hang in the space between us. My father blinked hard, as if translating them into something he could grasp. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips. Ethan let out a low whistle and pulled out his phone. His thumb moved quickly across the screen. Winslow & Co. New York headquarters. His face shifted as he scrolled. Fortune 100 client list named in Forbes. He looked up at me, his voice unsteady. This is real. It's real. I confirmed. Miles leaned forward, his business school seriousness returning. If that's true, you must have major contracts. Which ones? The Metropolitan Museum of Art, I said. The New York Philharmonic. Several Fortune 100 companies. Even the United Nations. The event Bernardine catered last month, that was one of ours. Vivian's eyes darted from me to Ethan's screen, then back to me. Her lips parted, but no sound came. You never told us? Miles said, shaking his head. Not once. Why keep something like this hidden? I met his gaze. Because I didn't want to spend my life proving myself to you. I wanted to build something without depending on your approval or your skepticism. If I succeeded, I wanted it to be mine. Entirely mine. My father's voice cracked, thick with pride and disbelief. 68 million. My daughter built this. Yes, I said softly, my hands steady on the table. I built this. And I built it quietly, so that when you finally saw it, there would be no doubt. Vivian swallowed hard, her face pale, her certainty slipping through her fingers like sand. My father's hand trembled slightly as he set his glass down. His eyes still fixed on me. "Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I've ever been more proud in my life. But why?" He shook his head slowly. "Why keep something like this from us?" I drew in a breath, because I needed to know I could stand without leaning on anyone's expectations or judgments. I wanted to grow without wondering if your pride or disapproval was shaping my choices. It wasn't about shutting you out. It was about proving to myself that I could. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "All these years," she whispered, "you let us believe you were just getting by. You carried our doubts in silence. You let your sister talk down to you, and you never said a word." Across the table, Vivian's face had lost all its practiced certainty. She set her glass down with a muted clink and stared at the linen as though it might hide her. "I lectured you for half the evening," she said finally, her voice raw. "I mocked you about money, about appearances while knowing nothing about the life you'd built. Do you have any idea how foolish I feel I reached across the table, my hand steady? Viv, envy can blind anyone. You thought you were protecting me from mistakes I wasn't making. I don't need your apology. I just need you to see me clearly now." She looked up, her eyes uncertain, her defenses cracking. For the first time that night, she didn't look like my critic. She looked like my sister. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It carried the fragile weight of something that might be repaired. The waiter returned with a chilled bottle of champagne, his movements smooth and discreet. "Compliments of the house," he said, bowing slightly before easing the cork free. The soft pop cut through the silence, and for the first time that evening, no one winced at the sound. He poured carefully, each glass catching the golden fizz. When he finished, my father raised his flute with hands that still shook, though this time from something closer to joy than fear. "To my daughter," he said, his voice breaking, "not for the money, for the strength she carried when we didn't see it. To resilience," my mother added softly, lifting her glass through tears. I raised mine last. "To authenticity, to family that learns to see each other as we are, not as we assume." The crystal touched gently in the center of the table. For a moment, it felt as though the evening might be salvaged. The laughter that followed was tentative, but it no longer carried cruelty. I let the warmth settle before speaking again. "There's something else," I said. "Next spring marks your 35th anniversary. I'd like to plan it a celebration worthy of what you've built together. Not as a display, but as a gift, something beautiful and entirely from the heart." My mother gasped softly, a smile cutting through her tears. My father simply nodded, unable to speak. Vivian lifted her glass again, her smile tight at the corners. "That would be something," she said, her words polite but her pride still lingering in the shadows. I caught the strain in her tone, and I let it be. The champagne sparkled between us, a fragile bridge across the earlier divide, carrying us all just far enough toward tomorrow. We stepped out into the Manhattan night, the sharp air cutting against the warmth of the dining room. The city hummed around us, taxis sliding past, neon spilling over the sidewalk, the endless rhythm that had carried me through years of long days and longer nights. For a moment, we all stood together, the skyline rising above us. My father exhaled deeply, his arm resting gently around my mother's shoulders. She leaned into him, her eyes still glistening, though now with something closer to peace than shock. I walked a little ahead, letting the cool air clear my chest. Behind me, Vivian's heels clicked against the pavement before she caught up, slipping her arm through mine. She hesitated, then said with a half smile, "Next time, maybe just lead with Millionaire. It would save me the lecture." I laughed, not unkindly, and ruin the suspense. Her smile faltered into something more genuine. I'm sorry, Alara. Truly, I may never live this down. You don't have to. I told her. You just have to remember that what matters isn't the number in a ledger, but the truth between us. She squeezed my arm, and for once, there was no sharpness in her touch. We walked on, my family falling into step beside me. The night felt different now, lighter, freer, as though the weight of pretending had finally lifted. The dinner had cost $3,000, but the gift I carried out of Bernardine wasn't measured in money. It was in knowing my family finally saw me whole beyond doubt, beyond modesty, beyond the need to prove anything at all.